Morning, all. Hope you're doing well. It's Tuesday morning, October 22nd. Oh my gosh, time marches on. I'm Jeffrey Rickman. I'm a global Methodist preacher who does a morning news show right now. It's more news commentary, really. I'm not producing any of my own original content except for today's stuff on Nigeria. I think only a few people know the fullness of the picture that I'm going to give you today. So there are rewards for following along. But the whole point here of what I'm trying to do is just getting people thinking theologically, helping people reckon with the world through a biblical lens rather than kind of whatever you're going to find when you turn on the TV. I think that our faith is the most important thing about us. It's the most relevant thing about us. It's the thing that determines how we do everything else. And I know that's not how we're conditioned to live. Even so, that's how, when I open my Bible, I see us expected to live. So I hope you agree. Um, I, uh, I don't know what else is helpful to say at the front end of this. I'm going to try and cover 5 topics a day. I did it successfully yesterday. Was happy to see that after letting my channel languish for a time, that a number of people just signed right back on and have enjoyed thinking through stuff with me. I'm not going to pretend to be an ultimate authority on anything I'm speaking about. The whole intent here is getting people thinking and praying rightly on these things, so that however things develop in the world, it's bathed in prayer. Before we get in to whatever we get into today, want to say howdy to Duncan and Pat, my Japanese missionary. Well, Stephen is an Anglo missionary in Japan, writing in Japanese. I think those are the first Japanese characters ever seen on my live stream. So thank you. Good to see you, brother. My sister Jen and TJ. Good morning from Horton, Texas. Glad to have you with me. Everybody, as you per if you're watching this live, go ahead and sign on. Let me know your reflections on whatever the topic is that we're covering. And then if you want to email me about reflections on whatever we've covered or things that you think I should cover in the coming days, this is where you can reach me, plainspokenpod@gmail.com. I recently subscribed to the subscription service on X Premium. Remember, X is what used to be Twitter, and they have their own AI. I don't know if you're familiar with AI, artificial intelligence. It's computers trying to be human or speak to us in human terms, kind of do connect some dots that traditionally computers haven't been able to. The one on X is called Grok, Grok. I don't know where that name came from, but I asked it this morning, what are the headlines for today's morning news? And here's what it says. We're going to see what we think of Grok. I haven't gotten to read through this real well since it says there are political and legal developments. There's significant political tension in various regions, including discussions around sentencing reviews, potential alternatives to prison sentences like house arrest, and political reactions to legal decisions. Okay, that's quite vague, but I have noticed in the headlines some concern about um, sentencing people rightly. In the United Kingdom, a Met firearms officer was found not guilty in the murder case of Chris Kaba, which has sparked various reactions and discussions about police conduct. We've been talking about that for a while. International relations, India and China have reportedly agreed on disengagement along the line of actual control, easing some tensions, but still under close watch. Yeah, the two most populated nations in the world, I believe, it's been anxious. Canada's handling of free speech and international relations has come under criticism, particularly highlighted by an incident with India. Oh, yeah, they kicked out a bunch of Indian people over an assassination that took place a while back. With respect to the economy and business, India's economic forecast by RBI predicts a 7.2 GDP growth, indicating a robust outlook, but with various domestic issues like patient care at hospitals being affected. I know nothing about this. Discussions around foreign investments in Nigeria indicate challenges with only $5 billion in FDI recorded. What's FDI? Excuse me. Look up FDI. Come on. Foreign direct investment. Okay, yeah, when how many people outside of the country are investing in your country if Nigeria is suspected to be heavily corrupt, they're not going to get much foreign investment. So only $5 billion in foreign investment recorded amidst other economic strategizing like the search for a running mate for political figures in 2027 elections. With respect to the environment, weather events such as record breaking heat in certain regions are part of the morning discussions alongside with other climate related. Well, thank you for that. Health and safety recalls like the one for frozen waffles due to safety concerns are also making headlines. What? Oh, recalls like the one for frozen waffles due to safety concerns are also making headlines focusing on consumer health. Yeah, if you don't know it, the major food companies are poisoning you slowly but surely. Um, Man, that was such a weird sentence. I didn't know frozen waffles got recalled. Cultural and social events, the royal family's tour has been overshadowed by protests, particularly highlighted by an Indigenous Australian senator heckling King Charles, reflecting broader societal and political sentiments. Yeah, the world's increasingly intolerant of any kind of authority. And then local news, there's not much there. So Grok did okay. I don't know. I'll check the actual headlines later and see how much overlap there was. But I just knew I didn't have time to really go through it on my own. We got Rosie with us. Good morning, Rosie, Olivia, Ben, Tim. I worship with a lot of these folks at 6 in the morning, and so I love going through developments in the world with them as well. The first topic I had for us this morning deals with the country of Georgia. I know it's kind of confusing because there's a state in our nation called Georgia as well, but there's a country called Georgia. Here's where it is, and it's okay if you don't. It's by Azerbaijan and Armenia. You got Russia close. As I zoom out, you see Ukraine up there. That's Russia. So Georgia is a tiny little state. They hate Russia, although culturally a lot of overlap. Obviously, they're right there, and you'll see little lines, dotted lines. These are places where Georgia has actually invaded and taken land. And we don't talk about that nearly as much as Ukraine. I'm not really quite sure. Well, because there's not fighting going on, I probably. But Georgia has recently signed a bill just called anti-LGBTQ. So if you look in your show notes, you can pull this article up for yourself. I was sent this by Richard. Thanks to Richard for tipping me off to it. And the reason I'm talking about it today, it's not uniquely related to Methodism or Christianity. I think it's important for Westerners, and most of my audience is Western, to understand what's going on geopolitically globally. You know, right here in America, we're swimming in the thick of this cultural revolution that's been going on really since the 1960s with Kinsey and money, really trying to revise how the public understands itself sexually. Sexual identitarian politics has been used to create a wedge in our society between the old and the new, the eternal and the artificial, and so it continues to be used in trans developments, LGBTQ stuff, and we here in the thick of it can't necessarily step outside of it and see it for what it is. So it's helpful to look at how different parts of the world are responding to America exporting its theories about human sexuality and identity. So that's what's going on here in Georgia, which has, I mean, it's its own state dealing with Russia, its own cultural uh, preservation issues. If you haven't, Johnny Harris as a YouTuber, he does really pretty good work. I think he leans farther left than I do. I don't think he's even a believer, but he does really good segments on different stuff around the world. He makes beautiful maps. But he did one on Georgia that I found really helpful. Interviewed a lot of local Georgians talking about how they perceive their country. It's a beautiful country. I would love to go someday. Anyway, let's look at this article and try and figure out a little bit what's going on. The Speaker of Georgia's parliament on Thursday signed into law a bill similar to Russian legislation that curbs the rights of LGBTQ people, despite warnings from the European Union. The move came a day after Georgia's pro-Western president, Salome, I'm not going to say that last name, at loggerheads with the ruling Georgia Dream Party, refused to sign the bill. The bill is similar to Moscow's gay propaganda law, which also bans gender reassignment and nullifies same sex marriages performed abroad or on Georgian territory. Quote, in conformity with the Constitution, I signed today the law on family values and the protection of minors, which Salome didn't sign. Speaker Shalva, crazy last name, said on Facebook. I know it's not crazy, it's just I'm not part of that culture. The ruling Georgian Dream pushed the bill through Parliament last month, a vote boycotted by the opposition, and which has fueled tensions ahead of a crucial October 26 parliamentary election. Papaushvili said the measure, quote, is based on common sense, historical experience, and centuries-old Christian, Georgian, and European values, rather than on changeable ideas and ideologies. So that's a good quote right there. That helps you kind of understand how it is that many people around the world are responding to America. He claimed that, quote, the law protects the rights of all citizens, end quote. However, rights groups and Western countries have said that it is discriminatory and creates a dangerous environment for LGBTQ people. Last month, a well-known Georgian transgender woman was stabbed to death, an attack that came during the push for the law. The bill also comes after Tbili's recent adoption of an anti-NGO foreign influence law, which triggered weeks of mass anti-government protests and Western condemnation. Critics accuse the ruling Georgian Dream Party of moving closer to the Kremlin's orbit. Kremlin is the leading body in Russia, and jeopardizing Georgia's bid for EU membership. So this is kind of complicated because Russia is overtly trying to influence the politics of all the countries around it, as seen most profoundly in the Ukraine. And there's a legal measure. Johnny Harris talks about this in his report of they've adopted legislation saying that foreign money cannot come in to influence their politics. The accusation being that America and the EU have been pumping money into Georgia to create anti-Russian sentiment. Excuse me. Still getting over this cough from my sinus infection. So there are a lot of people alleging in this article, especially, that this legal measure, is an extension not of really what Georgians want, but of a Russian agenda to expand their culture to surrounding areas. So one way of seeing this would be that people of the world generally are indifferent to sexual freedom and don't really care about America advancing the LGBTQ cause. If you don't know it, we've been trying to coercively export our sexual norms for some time, including under the Trump administration. Ambassadors were sent out across the world to make trade deals contingent upon countries passing laws that we like around gay stuff or abolishing laws that we didn't like around gay stuff. So this has been something that we've been trying to strong-arm countries into being much more accepting of homosexual or transsexual or demisexual, whatever practices around the world. And some places have happily accepted it along with the money that flows afterwards. There are a lot of places that have rejected it. In Africa and East Asia, I've just said, you know what, if the cost of doing business with you is that we have to undo our moral fabric, we're not willing to do it. So you'll notice a lot of language like that in these quotes is we want to protect our families, we want to protect our culture, our religion, and changing these sexual norms has implications in all of these ways. So in the hyper-individualist West, we often hear things like, if you don't like gay marriage, don't get gay married. You know, if you don't like abortion, don't have one. It's this understanding that we don't share in a social fabric, that what another person does not impact you. But people in other countries can't help but notice that in America, we have a hard time staying unaffected by one another, that there does seem to be something called a social fabric, or you can call it something else, but where we are all impacted by one another, and that whenever we are indifferent to the sexual behaviors of others or monetary behaviors of others or family behavior of others, that has a way of impacting us, our children, our families. And so there is a reason to try and make sure that a country's laws do conform to the social fabric so that you protect your culture and fabric. So you'll notice a lot of the politics in America very much has to do with this notion of a social fabric, protecting a shared monoculture that we all share in, even if we have differences in ethnicity. So this is how it's all connected. In Georgia and around the world, people are trying to protect local cultures and values while being also part of a global society. And different places are doing it differently. And Western media is going to treat it differently based on if they toe the line and what the audience is. So as I look at Georgia, I think they're in a tough spot politically for several reasons. And it's hard to say how much of this is rooted in actual sentiment of Georgians and how much of it is part of this kind of satellite cultural warfare between Russia and America. I really don't know. What I do know is that this sexual revolution that's been taking place since the 1960s does have huge implications for not just our social fabric, but also our religious life, because what we do in the bed very much matters in our religious life. And anyone who tells you otherwise is lying to you, and that's going to cost you if you believe them. So keep watching Georgia, keep watching around the world, actually. I think, yes, in America, we're the trendsetters, but we are not the only ones that matter. So keep that in mind. Want to say good morning to Sherman from Mississippi. Jen says Grok didn't mention that today is St. John Paul II Day for Catholics. That seems to be all over X this morning. I had not seen that. Thank you. Mark says good morning from Eastern Ohio. Steven says, I think you meant Russia invaded those areas as those areas are similar. Yeah, I don't know what I said, but it was definitely Russia for sure. Political laws always come years after the acceptance of cultural laws. Weed is a good example, sadly, of this. China is a good example of working the long game of culture change. So, yeah, Stephen could probably speak to that much more intelligently than I could. But yeah, the role of laws with respect to culture and its people, it's not clear how much the tail wags the dog versus how much laws just reflect what's already the case on the ground. At least from my conservative perspective, it feels to me like humans are, at least in America, we are trying to shift human behavior with laws, and to some degree, it's successful. And some days, in some degree, it's causing a big reaction. I think the next topic. Let me make sure. Yeah. Okay. I wanted to update you guys on Nigeria. I spent some time with contacts on the ground in Nigeria yesterday. I told you that there had been violence towards Ande Emmanuel. If you don't remember who Ande Emmanuel is, he's an activist leader on the part of the United Methodist Church in Nigeria, and he's been an antagonist. I've actually interviewed him once before. It was a good interview, I think, but he's very much not. He thinks that, well, he and I are pretty much on opposite sides of everything. He's for the institution. I'm for. I mean, here's his Facebook profile right here. You see, he's got the open hearts, open minds, open doors. Nobody has that anymore. But he's put himself forward as an Episcopal candidate. He loved talking on the floor of General Conference, doing that a lot. That's a picture of him right here. Here is a video of him right here. I think he's in his hospital room, but he is denying that he got beat up at all. But according to eyewitness testimony yesterday, the guy got terribly beaten. Said had blood coming out of his mouth. Said was getting stomped on the ground. It was pretty bad. Got this treatment a couple days ago on Sunday. So the developments here, and I might get a couple details wrong, but generally speaking, all of this is going to be accurate. You know, I'm a broad strokes guy. Within Nigeria, of course, the Nigerian United Methodist Church had a big split under Bishop Yohana a few months ago. They left the United Methodist Church en masse. Their trustees went to the Nigerian government and changed the name of their organization to the Global Methodist Church, and it was approved by the state of Nigeria. There was a legal battle a couple of months ago. The attorney general or assistant attorney general got representatives of the United Methodist Church and the Global Methodist Church together, had both make their cases as to why it is that each of them should control these buildings and assets. And the state government heard the case from the United Methodist Church and the Global Methodist Church and sided with the Global Methodist Church. What it really all came down to was, has the United Methodist Church legalized homosexuality? Has it normalized, has it blessed homosexuality? And the answer after this last general conference was yes. It's plain for all to see that even though they make provision for certain regions to maintain their own cultural norms and values, that's what they're saying across Africa right now is, if you don't like gay marriage, don't get gay married. You don't have to have it there, but we're going to have it in America and you need to deal with it. In Nigeria, most who have come to understand the picture for what it is have said, no, we don't want anything to do with that anymore. And so they've split away with the Global Methodist Church. The state of Nigeria is hostile to Western cultural imposition. They're not at all in favor of the gay stuff. And so as soon as that became evident to them, it was just very clear the Global Methodist Church is the only legal entity in Nigeria now. They've made it clear that the United Methodist Church is not a legal entity anymore. Bishop John Scholl and many United Methodist leaders have continued to engage the state, trying to advocate for themselves, getting some of the property. I know United Methodist Women, or I think they're called United Women of Faith now. I forget what they're called. They've got a lawsuit in the Judicial Council for the United Methodist Church trying to get some of their property back that the GMC took. It's a big, complicated mess, but in the midst of all this, they couldn't find their articles of incorporation for the United Methodist Church. The state lost track of them. So the GMC started declaring victory and saying, hey, we're the legal entity now. Our trustees have been able to change the name. All of our churches are now GMC. And in the midst of that, Ande Emmanuel made a post saying, hey, don't worry. This is all propaganda. We still have our articles of incorporation. And he posted a scanned copy of it on Facebook. He immediately took it back off because what it pretty clearly indicated was that he had stolen it from a government office in Jalingo. And so people who were friends with him and not really friends with him screenshotted it to show that he had done that. And so I got sent the screenshot yesterday. And now he has a warrant out for his arrest from Jalingo for stealing government property. So he hasn't been in Jalingo. There'd been this drama in Abuja. I showed you footage yesterday of a church where they took down the United Methodist sign on the inside and they're celebrating. I had previous to that, a month or so ago, shown you footage of them having a church fight because after the GMC claimed title, there were fights in all kinds of churches all over, including this one. I shouldn't indicate that there was arguing in many churches as reps from the GMC went from church to church saying, we're GMC now, we're not with the UMC. And then there was arguing about what had happened and who was actually in charge. And that continues to go on because it's a big spread out country and they're not as interconnected as we are in the West. So in this fight, the police got called and then the police locked down the property. And then after things got figured out, the assistant inspector general interviewed with many GMC leaders. This church has a big gate around it. They unlocked the gate. They let them come in and change the signage. And then they were expecting to have worship there this last Sunday. The day before or 2 days before, Ande flies in from Tanzania, and he is able to get the local police to operate in contradiction to the orders of the assistant attorney general, which is weird. How did that happen? Inspector General, excuse me. How did that happen? It's still not entirely clear, but the police came and they locked down the premises again. And thousands of people that were expecting to worship there that Sunday were locked out of the property and very upset because this was not supposed to happen. So eventually people give up. The state is there to guarantee that they don't go into the church. And a few people are still standing around. And they see Ande Emmanuel come on the back of a motorbike by the property. And then he comes back through and he's smiling at the people, which they take to be insulting because he seems to be rejoicing in the fact that they're locked out. And then, according to the guy I talked to, he actually got off his bike, tried to walk into the premises, And then these young GMC guys there, they're probably GMC, who knows, are the police report says unidentified people. So we don't know for a fact that they're GMC. They're almost certainly GMC. They stop him. They say, "You're Ande Emmanuel. What are you doing here?" He says, "Oh, I'm not Ande. I'm not Ande." And they finally just beat him really badly. And then he's rushed to the hospital. And then he has police there that after he's given medical attention, they take him to the police headquarters. And according to the guys that I talked to, he escaped police custody because he knew he had a warrant out for his arrest from Jalingo. This is in Abuja now. And so he is now running from the law. I don't know. It could be that I've heard this wrong. It could be that other people are confused. So I totally reserve the right to change my reporting on this later. But as it is, it seems like Ande is injured. He's running from the police. He's posting stuff on Facebook saying, "Oh, none of this is true." So there is a hypothetical world where I've totally heard wrong, but I don't think so. These guys that I've talked to have been pretty solid for me for some time. So, um, meanwhile, on WhatsApp, the whole way I got a hold of this information was on WhatsApp. I'm a part of a group with dozens, if not hundreds, of native Nigerians and Africans. And so many of them, half of them are rejoicing that Ande got beat up. Finally, he's had it coming for a long time. He's lied. He's caused all kinds of division and dissension in Nigeria. They've just consistently wondered, what is it animating this guy? What compels him to behave this way? Why would he behave this way? And so there's this cathartic. Finally, the Lord let him get this beat down that he needed. But then half of the other people, including, the American voices, I can't believe you would rejoice that this man is getting hurt. We pray for our enemies. We love our enemies. And so many of the Nigerians have said, you don't know what you're talking about. You Americans stay in your own lane. Of course, I've said nothing on one way or the other on that. I would not say that we get to read the Bible differently based on where we live and the injunctions to pray for our enemy and care for those who hate us. I would not say that those don't apply in Nigeria. I just feels complicated. Maybe because I don't know. I don't know why. I don't think I'm worried about being neo-colonial. My personal feelings are I would rather that Ande not get beat up, but I'm just consistently frustrated that what he says is so different from what other people say, and there doesn't seem to be any way to navigate truth from fiction. So, I was told before General Conference that he couldn't even leave the country, that his visa was denied, and then he went to General Conference. So I obviously heard wrong. I'm confused all the time about this stuff, but I'm almost certain that he actually did get beat up. And regardless of whether or not he did, all these tensions in Nigeria are real. It still remains to be seen if the United Methodist Church can cobble any of these properties together. There are definitely a lot of clergy that have still said that they want to remain United Methodist, but whenever the state gets involved, which it has, I'm not sure what legal options they have for holding on to these properties. So keep eyes on Nigeria, and they're not the only country where there's a lot of tension. We've been looking at Liberia, Cote d'Ivoire, some left the UMC, but it remains to be seen if the UMC is going to try and keep them in. I've heard stuff about Zambia recently. So this is stuff going on all around the world that we should keep our eyes on. So we'll pray for them at the end of the hour. Our third topic today is bishops in the Global Methodist Church. We've had 2 press releases in the last 2 weeks from the GMC. Of course, at the convening conference, they staffed these agencies, committees that are responsible for different things in the church. The Global Episcopacy Committee is one of those committees. They're not responsible for electing bishops, but once the General Conference elects those bishops, they are responsible for overseeing those bishops and appointing those bishops to different episcopal areas, deciding what those episcopal areas will be. So, let's see. I forget which one of these is first. Okay, so this one is first, October 10th, 2024. This is a short one. The Global Episcopacy Committee, appointed by the General Conference, held its inaugural meeting on Wednesday, October 9th, convened by Connectional Operations Officer Mike Schaefer. He's the new guy at the top of the whole structure. At this meeting, Chris Ritter was elected as chairperson. Nobody's surprised by this. He's done a very good job doing compare and contrast between different Methodist denominations and how Methodists have had the episcopacy at different points in history. Excuse me. Jason Burnham is vice chairperson and Christine Hargrove is secretary. Distinct from other global commissions and committees, the Global Episcopacy Committee commenced its work immediately following the election, so I guess the rest of them are waiting for the new year. One of its primary tasks is to assign bishops to areas of responsibility, with new episcopal terms set to begin on November 1st. Guided by General Conference mandates, the committee is consulting with annual conference delegations, Bishops Jones and Webb, and the Transitional Leadership Council to ensure thoughtful placement. So the Transitional Leadership Council is continuing on. They're the board responsible for overseeing the whole denomination. They're continuing forward for another couple of months till things transition over to what will be called the Connectional Council. Beyond assignments, the committee will also determine salaries and benefits for Episcopal leaders. I provided legislation to determine that. They shot it down. A comprehensive outline of the committee's responsibilities will be available in paragraph 505 of the forthcoming Book of Doctrines and Discipline. Quote, please pray for our bishops and the Global Episcopacy Committee members, said Chris Ritter, chairperson of the committee. While this new deployment process presents unique challenges, we are blessed with humble, faithful servants of Jesus whose goal is to spread scriptural holiness across the globe. So that's our new mission statement, to spread scriptural holiness across the globe. And then I'm pleased that they let everybody know who's on this committee. Greg Benefiel, I've seen the name, but I don't know him. Don Borland, don't know him. Jason Burnham, don't know him. William Floyd, Lyndall Lloyd, Christine Hargrove. I need to do a better job learning who's on these committees. Tyson Haynes is from my annual conference and a really solid guy. I think he's going to be great. Sarah Walters, we know who Matt O'Reilly is. I've interviewed him twice. He's going to be real solid. Chris Ritter, of course, is fantastic. Heather Sims, Joanne Valenzuela. Let's see. Is anybody else from Not America on here? I guess not. Okay, so Joanne's going to be holding up the global. It's interesting. They don't have any bishops from the Philippines. They have some from Africa, but we don't have any Africans on here. So anyway, I'm sure they're going to do a fantastic job. If you know someone who's on this committee, pray for them that they do a good job because, as we learned in the United Methodist Church, bishops play a very big role in the organization and how it does. Let's look at the follow-up. This was sent a week later. It's about the values and principles and how they're doing this. The convening conference of the GMC has instructed the Global Episcopacy Committee to assign those elected as bishops to serve the various annual conferences. In a spirit of transparency and goodwill, the GEC offers this statement to illumine the values and principles that are guiding the process of assigning bishops. The GEC invites the prayers and of the global church for wisdom as we seek to honor God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit in our work. The following values and principles only apply to the assignment of bishops for the next 2 years. The assignment of bishops in 2026 and beyond will be governed by paragraph 504 in the Book of Doctrines and Discipline. So we're not going to look at that. We can look at that some other time. So here's what they've laid out for us. Point 1, while the practice of bishops serving as general superintendents of the whole church is historically rooted in earlier periods of Methodist history, we recognize that this model is significantly different from the assignment of residential bishops within the bounds of each annual conference, a model to which many of us have been accustomed. So what it's saying is, in the United Methodist Church, we had one bishop over one annual conference, and we're not going to have that now. We're going to have one bishop over several annual conferences, and there might be some overlap. The general superintendency is new to us. Consequently, we humbly expect the interim period to be a learning opportunity. We recognize that our work is a contribution to the early stages of the GMC, and we are reminded that unless the Lord builds a house, the builders labor in vain. We therefore endeavor to be attentive to the leading of the Holy Spirit in all our work and we recognize the likelihood that it may become necessary to make adjustments along the way as we grow in our understanding of this newly adopted Episcopal model. I take this just to mean we're going to screw up. We're trying to reinvent the wheel, sort of, or adopt this thing that's already been done in other places. It's weird and foreign to us, and we're not going to be perfect at it. So please be gracious. And we're going to be gracious. You'll find churches that freak out anytime a new idea is proposed. They'll poke a million holes in it because they want to get it just right. And that's just silly. Just put something in place to the best of your ability and then augment it as you discover what's right and what's wrong. And so I think this is smart. 2, we value healthy transparency and good communication with the global church and will endeavor to release statements through GMC Office of Communications to keep the global church informed about our work. At the same time, because the GEC is charged with matters of personnel and human resources, much of our work will deal with sensitive information that must remain confidential. Our hope is to cultivate trust by holding in balance these values of appropriate transparency when possible and essential confidentiality when necessary. We welcome the prayers of the global church for wisdom in this matter. So this intersects with stuff I care very strongly about. I think transparency is absolutely essential. And then, of course, while I acknowledge there are places that are not helpful to share in the midst of deliberation, I draw that line much further to one extreme than most people. And I just can't help but notice that when people are entrusted to draw that line for themselves, uh, it's very easy to draw the line towards another extreme, just saying, it's just not helpful for the public to know this. We're not going to release information until it's mature. And I think that often does a lot of harm for trust. But we'll see how they do. Maybe they'll do better than a lot of bodies. Point 3, we recognize that different persons have different giftings for leadership and that different annual conferences have different needs. We also recognize that general superintendents are elected to serve as bishops of the whole global church. This means that any bishop should be adept enough as a leader to discern the leadership needs of any annual conference and to meet those needs appropriately. So, saying every region is different, every bishop is different. Some we'll try and match them up to the best of our ability, but also anyone in the bishop's office should be able to lead anywhere. So they're not exactly speaking out of both sides of their mouth, but they're just acknowledging these things can both be true at the same time. So we're going to do our best to tailor the situation to the personalities involved. But even if we get it wrong, like this is not rocket science. Like the Holy Spirit prevails here, and He's going to make sure people should be able to serve in various contexts. So we're just not going to worry about it that much. And I think that's fine and fair. Point 4, bishops will not normally be assigned to the conference from which they were elected, nor will they be assigned to a conference in which they hold an appointment. However, if there are extenuating circumstances, a bishop may be assigned to the conference from which they were elected for the flourishing of the mission. So this is especially pertinent in the case of like Nigeria, where John Pena Alta was just elected. So he can't serve in Nigeria. He's going to serve in all the other African areas but Nigeria, and Nigeria is going to be overseen by either Kimba Evariste, who's from the Congo, or by an American. Seems weird, but maybe, they're reserving the right to do that, but they can also reserve the right to keep him where he needs to be or where he is if it's needed for the flourishing of the mission, they say. Point 5, during the interim period, it is likely that bishops will not be assigned to the adjacent annual conferences. This emphasizes the traveling nature of the general superintendency and avoids the perception of unofficial episcopal areas. However, if there are extenuating circumstances, bishops may be assigned to geographically contiguous conferences. They will not be assigned to adjacent annual conferences. That makes me think that they're just going to have different random annual conferences around the connection that they're responsible for rather than like 4 or 5 of them grouped together. That's interesting. Why? 6, each annual conference has been asked to provide a list of preferred bishops for assignment. While these statements of preference will be prayerfully considered by the GEC, it may not be possible for all conferences to receive a preferred bishop. Many factors will be considered in the making of episcopal assignments, and the GEC is confident that with the quality of the bishops elected, each annual conference will be well served by whomever is assigned to the respective conference. So many of these are just saying like, here's what we know y'all want. We're going to do that to the best of our ability, but we're going to do what needs to get done. So get ready and deal with it. So in this case, it's like we know conferences have said who you want. We'll try and give them to you, but we also might decide that you need another one, and that's our prerogative. Point seven, and this is the final one. Acknowledging the reality of our own fallenness and frailty, the members of the GEC commit to striving in all we do to discern the will of the triune God. As servants of the Lord and of you, we resolve together to work in a spirit of grace, seeking always and in all things to encourage one another and build each other up. I just take that to mean we're going to actually be Christians as we do this work. And I appreciate Chris Ritter and I appreciate everybody doing this work, but these statements, I don't like these statements. I don't see the point of them whenever you're just going, we're going to do our best. It's going to be good enough. We see these things that you care about. We care about them too. We're going to try and be, like, that's all I really take this to say. We're going to do what we do. Let me tell you what would actually build trust is if along the way they say, here are the conversations we're having. What do you, general church public, think? And then provide a time for feedback, for people's thoughts to be heard. And then after they make a decision, say, here's how we conducted this conversation. Here are the different things that we looked at. And here's how we did the calculus. And you don't have to agree with us on how we did the calculus, but here's how we prayerfully considered these things. Here are the conversations we had. And whenever you can show, like if you saw my interview with Beth Ann Cook, she was able to show how they did that with planning the convening general conference. And when that conversation was over, I was so confident in her and her team having made good decisions and done everything that they could along the way. But if what this turns into is regular statements being put out saying, we understand these things are in tension, we're going to do our best, we're Christians, deal with it, that's going to be infuriating. So the right posture, I think, is important. I'm sure they actually will do something like that. I don't think it's going to be, we rule by fiat and you can't know anything that we're doing. I think it'll just be important that they show their work, just like every other group in the church. And that as they do so, that we can say, man, they had to consider a lot of things. I'm glad I'm not a part of that. Thank you guys for being willing to do that. So we'll be in prayer for them at the end of this hour. Let's see, it's A13. Can we cover the next two topics in 15 minutes? I think we can do one. Let's see. Here's an interesting one. We are dealing with the Lewis Center for Church Leadership has been going for I don't know how long. They have been tracking age trends for some time. Got the actual report in the show notes for you there. It's called the Clergy Age Trends in the United Methodist Church, their 2024 report. Here's the News article done on it, and it shows Bishop Graves there commissioning young people, but it's got some disturbing information. Let's read some of this article and then some of the study. A season of church disaffiliations has taken its toll on the number and age distribution of United Methodist clergy in the U.S. Uh-oh. That's the conclusion of the Lewis Center for Church Leadership in this year's report. While stressing that more data is needed, the Lewis Center reported that the United Methodist disaffiliation trends indicate U.S. clergy losses were highest among local licensed pastors. We all knew this. And least among deacons. I'm not sure how much we knew that. Church departures also contributed to reductions in the ranks of both the oldest and youngest elders. That's interesting. Seminary-educated ordained clergy who historically have filled most of the denomination's pulpits. Quote, among elders, it appears that losses occurred more among the older elders and young elders, the report said. So the thing that was said by many was that the oldest clergy are the bigots and that the younger people are the more progressively refined in their disposition. They're not augmented by the bigotries of the old folks, and that the United Methodist Church is going to be led by a newer, younger generation, a progressive, enlightened clergy, and that is immediately being disproved. Elders under 35, if you look at this, continued to go down in 2024. So yes, between 55 and 72, they left. Well, that's also retirement area. So that's easily explained. What explains young clergy leaving? Well, despite the best indoctrination efforts of the United Methodist seminaries, they know that the United Methodist Church is being faithless in what it's entrusted to. And when given the option to leave, they took it. The Lewis Center, based at United Methodist related Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, has been tracking United Methodist clergy since 2006 with a particular focus on young elders. This year sets a new record low for the fewest elders under the age of 35. This year's young U.S. elders number 398, a loss of 51 from last year's previous record low number. That total continues an 8-year slide, though the drop since last year was only a fraction of that between 2022 and 2023. So keep in mind, this is only dealing with ordained elders. It's not even dealing with local licensed pastors, which also skewed young, I believe. And when you lost a majority of them, that has some implications. Let's look at the actual report because they have their own highlights on page 3. So here's the highlights. This is their own language. Any report on changes in clergy numbers and ages must acknowledge clergy leaving as a result of the disaffiliation process between 2019 and 2024. While this is a factor in declining clergy numbers, it is difficult with the information we have at this point to identify the specific impact of disaffiliation on various age groupings of clergy. There are several variables that cause numbers of clergy by age uh, to change year by year. So they're couching this. It wouldn't necessarily be disaffiliation that's causing all this. It's not necessarily that we let there be a door open and young people choose to take it. Um, I'm obviously more confident than they are in concluding this. The recent decline in the number of young elders began in 2017 and followed modest gains after the low point of 2005. The decline continues. However, the scale of the decline increased dramatically beginning in 2019. Since the most recent decline began in 2019, there has been a decline of 63% in the number of under 35 elders. The losses have been greater among men than women based on the proportion of each among young elders. So there's also been a feminizing of the clergy in the UMC, which is what they want. But they've skewed old and they've skewed women in the United Methodist Church. This year sets a new record low for fewest young elders. However, since the overall number of active elders of all ages continues to decline, young elders constitute 5% of active elders in 2024, up from 4% in 2023. Now, for those who want to read the article on your own, you really should do so, and that's important. I'm sure there are many other nuances and details that are worthy of pointing out in this. This is not meant to be a comprehensive review. I also want to acknowledge on the front end, GMC has not released any stats on our clergy whatsoever. Hypothetically, it could be the case that our clergy skew just as old and that men also don't want to lead in the GMC. I kind of don't think that's what we're going to see. I'm just saying that until we collect our own data and publish our own data, it's real easy to poke at the UMC and say, see, they get it so wrong. But who says we're doing any better? So I think the time is coming. I'll be surprised if it doesn't happen within the next year that the Global Methodist Church publishes its own stats on our clergy thus far. I still think it's worth pointing out, even if we're hypothetically not necessarily doing any better, the United Methodist Church, anytime there's a difference between rhetoric and outcomes, I think it needs to be highlighted. The United Methodist Church has heralded itself as the church of the new, the young, the culturally relevant. They are not that. They want to be that. They keep projecting this image of what that looks like and say we're doing it, but there doesn't seem to be much openness to the possibility that they are wrong, and they are going to continue to put their head down and plow in this direction that they've decided, and they're going to continually look up from time to time and go, "Oh, we're all getting older and smaller. Why is it?" But they're not going to ask why is it happening. They're just going to say, "Keep on pushing to the prize, keep on going to that holy calling that we've got," and then they're going to die. That seems pretty clear from previous trends, from the fact that there is not a moment of reckoning right now, as local churches have stopped giving in large part, as people continue to run for the doors and lawsuits continue to happen. That's just, they do not seem to have the ability in the United Methodist leadership. They don't seem to have the self-awareness to reflect on maybe they've done things wrong. And as continued fallout uh, is perpetuated, they'll just continue going in the same direction. We've seen them continue to metabolize local churches that can't defend themselves, selling off their assets, especially in the Western jurisdiction. There will continue to be lawsuits and people running for the doors. And it's just a really sad story that didn't have to go this way. All right. Only one more topic for us today, and then we'll go to locals. The final topic is Selma is an important city in American history. Selma's oldest church is suing United Methodists in an effort to keep its property. So we've already seen a lot of this. Here's this beautiful old church in Selma, Alabama, Church Street, Methodist Church in Selma, founded in 1835. It filed a lawsuit on October 14th. It's the city's oldest church at 185 years old, and this week it sued the Alabama West Florida Conference of the United Methodist Church in an effort to keep control of its property. The 350-member congregation argues in a lawsuit filed October 14th in Dallas County Circuit Court that it never agreed to the trust clause that binds the property of congregations to the United Methodist denomination. The church is asking that a judge declare that the church property belongs solely to the congregation and not to the denomination. Church Street Methodist sits on the only piece of land in Selma that has never been bought or sold, according to a church history. Man, what a thing. City planners set aside a plot of land for a Protestant church, and the Methodists built a wooden church on that site in 1835. A brick structure was built in 1856, and the current church building was built in 1901. In 1875, the city of Selma conveyed the 1-acre tract of property to church trustees, and the deed is on file at Dallas County Probate Office. The lawsuit is the latest in a series of legal maneuvers by churches attempting to leave the denomination after being blocked from disaffiliating by the Alabama West Florida Conference. Two such lawsuits have already made it to the Alabama Supreme Court. The state's high court ruled that Harvest Church in Dothan did have the right to have its case heard in civil courts. Church Street Methodist cites the Harvest case and makes some of the same arguments. So I've already talked about Harvest Church a few times. They are filed not just against their annual conference, but against the General Council of Finance and Administration for the entire denomination. And then when the Supreme Court reviewed the case, they said that can happen. Go forth and prosecute the GCFA. In another case, a group of 44 churches said that sued the Alabama West Florida Conference were told by the Supreme Court that they would have to pursue their cases through the church courts and not civil courts. So that was a victory for the annual conference, not for those 44 churches that filed suit. I've reported on them. You can search through my catalog on YouTube and just type in Alabama, and you'll find my reporting on the different stages in the story that have been really sad and disappointing. Quote, "We are saddened by this litigation, but we are confident the process we have adhered to is fair and just," the conference said in a statement about churches that have filed a lawsuit against the conference asking to leave. Church Street Methodist is one of several churches involved in that lawsuit that have now filed individually. So they were part of that group of 44. They were shut down. Now they're just filing individually. Because of a continuing denominational feud over same-sex marriage and ordination, they're reviewing some of the recent history. Quote, "At present, the UMC denomination is in a state of flux," the lawsuit filed by Church Street Methodist says. Yeah, I don't have time to read the rest of that. But this is another development. There are going to continue to be many lawsuits around the country from local churches that are looking at different factors like, is the trust clause actually anywhere on their deed? Did they ever formally adopt it at all? Or is the denomination is the annual conference inferring that they have this authority where they don't? And so Harvest Church Dothan is making the exact same case. And we'll see what these different state Supreme Courts rule. Like even right now, if it's in a district court, it's going to get appealed up to a Supreme Court. There was a recent decision in Baltimore, Washington. I'm going to report on that tomorrow. There's an appeal to the Texas Supreme Court from Rio, Texas. Lots of lawsuits going on. I'll do my best to track these as they go forward. So I appreciate y'all being gracious as I try to review these. We're now at 826, and my work here is funded and supported by people on Substack and locals. For that reason, I try and find ways to show preferential treatment for Substack and locals people. So at the tail end of this morning briefing, sometimes I'm going to have an interview that I'm doing where we start here and we migrate over to locals. Other times, I'm just going to end my reporting here and then I'm going to take the conversation over to locals. If you are a supporter on Substack and you're not qualified, I haven't qualified you to go over to locals and participate. Please email me so I can give you those credentials and you can participate. And so I want you, you're funding my work. I appreciate you. Thank you. And if you want to fund my work, then let's see, I think I have it right here. Plainspoken.locals.com. This is where you can go right now if you want to follow us over to the conversation. I also post unique content there, full interviews. It's worth supporting. Minimum of $5 a month. Most people can do that. I hope you agree that it's worth it. Um, I wanted to plug my Substack just really quick, jeffreyrickman.substack.com. If you're interested in the Methodist tradition and how I see it and what I'm advocating for, I just finished a 12-part series on that has been widely viewed and considered. And if you haven't read it yet, you really should. And then also, if you go over to plainspokenpod.substack.com, that's where I publish the podcast, all of my interviews, and I write articles there about Methodist denominational stuff. So I started writing an article last night that I'll hopefully publish today or tomorrow on the unique assets of the Global Methodist Church, the different incentive structure that it has, and why I'm hopeful about it doing Methodism better than any group has ever done it before. So I know that sounds audacious, but it should be a good article. So go over there and subscribe if you haven't already. All right. So I see a few different comments. I'm going to handle the rest of the comments over at locals. And so if you want to be a part of that conversation, you can go over there now. If not, I'll be at this again tomorrow morning. See ya.